Yo guys, it's Dunmere. I'm a top 100 Overwatch and rank 3 Supervive player, and here I have a guide for you guys for Shiv. I playtested the game for over 400 hours since I have 1.5 years of pre-alpha testing experience. So, enjoy the guide, guys. Let's begin with Shiv's abilities. Shiv's primary fire ability is a rapid fire pistol shot. It can be empowered by using Shiv's left shift dash to gain a shot that deals more damage, cleaves through enemies, and travels even farther. For Shiv's secondary fire, she has a grounding snare ability. Throw out a chain snare that will ground enemies it hits, traveling farther if it hits one. If this ability hits multiple enemies, it will stun them. This stun will also activate on a single enemy if the chain snare also hits a destructible. Shiv's E ability is a teleportation dagger. Throw out a dagger that will travel a far distance, planting in any enemy or obstacle it hits, or the ground at max range. This dagger will force teleport Shiv after 6 seconds, but can be reactivated earlier to teleport faster. Hit an enemy directly with the dagger to slow them for a few seconds, and also reduce the dagger's cooldown by a third. Alternatively, hit an obstacle with the dagger to still reduce its cooldown, but slightly less. For Shiv's left shift dash, she has an empowering cartwheel. Shiv cartwheels forward, gaining an empowered bullet for her next primary fire shot. Hit an enemy with the empowered shot to get a full reset of her cartwheel. When Shiv cartwheels, she also gains a boosted movement speed for a short time. For Shiv's ultimate, she has an AoE anti-heal and damage attack. After a short delay, Shiv fires shots at all nearby enemies for 2 seconds. These shots deal more damage at the edges of the ultimate, and when enemies have more missing health, and will also apply anti-heal. During use of the ultimate, Shiv also gains 2 charges of her cartwheel. Shiv's passive ability has 2 parts. The first part applies stacks with each pistol shot she hits that progressively increase her damage. These stacks apply from both her unempowered and empowered shots. The second part restores Shiv's HP by 25% of her max health when she gets a knock or assist. With the abilities covered, let's discuss Shiv's strengths and weaknesses, starting with the strengths. Though Shiv may seem like a standard assassin or flanker type character, she's actually much more versatile than that. Instead, she's full of the standard strengths that an assassin or flanker type would have, but also has more on top of that. So getting into it, the first of her core strengths is that she has excellent power into groups. While counterplay in other games to a character like Shiv may be to group up to counter their single target damage, Shiv is actually amazing into groups for a couple of reasons. First, her empowered pistol shot deals multi-target cleave damage, so even with her standard attacks, she can burn through stacked enemies. Second, she has a very powerful ultimate that applies huge AoE damage to all enemies she catches in its radius. And third, her crowd control chain snare actually becomes more strong against groups, as it will only ground single enemies, but stun when it hits more than one of them. Put this all together, and Shiv is actually quite impressive against multiple enemies at once. Shiv's second core strength is that on top of all this amazing group kill potential, she also has amazing solo kill potential. Her raw damage output is at the top of the game, despite it being multi-target, so even if she confronts one enemy, she usually has the advantage, especially as the fight goes on due to her passive stacking up more damage per shot. Shiv's chain snare also allows her to ground enemies she hits with it, so if she lands it on a solo, they'll be forced to tank damage from her before they can even attempt an escape. Combo this with the excellent microdash utility she has with her cartwheel ability, and she is favored to win 1v1s against nearly any character in Supervive. Yet in addition to all this, her third core strength is mobility that is near the top of the game. Shiv's mobility gives her a stunning capability to get to wherever she wants in a fight, which also lets her get on top of whoever she wants. But it's also even more valuable in the nature of Supervive's resurrection-based gameplay, as she can reliably outrun nearly any enemy in the game to escape a lost fight. Having said that, while Shiv's strengths are both versatile and powerful, she still does have some limitations. The first of these is her low range. While it isn't the absolute lowest in the game, it's still mid-ranged at best. And though she does have options to counteract this with her mobility, it still requires she use the mobility for this, and therefore limits her ability to poke enemies away without requiring her to commit onto them. This of course is quite dangerous in a battle royale game. In addition, her engagements can be quite predictable. If a Shiv doesn't have good angles to sneakily flank on, she's forced to use her dagger to engage with. Though she can partially control the timing of when she actually goes in before the timer forces her to, it's still pretty predictable. So if Shiv can't mitigate this a bit by teleporting a bit behind cover or something, or doesn't have allies to engage with, she will often be punished. So with the strengths and weaknesses covered, let's talk about how to actually play Shiv. Shiv plays best by flanking, looking to surround the enemy team to either bully a single enemy in a 1v1, or looking to herd enemies into a group so she can full engage with them and crush them with her AoE capabilities. More than this, Shiv can get double value doing so from the shadows, sneaking out of the enemy's vision until she can either catch a single one by surprise, or until she can pull up on a grouped up team before slamming them with her AoE utility and escaping with her dagger after if needed. So with that as an overview of strategy, let's get into specifics on her abilities. To use Shiv's primary fire best, you want to think about your positioning in regard to the empowered versus non-empowered versions. When empowered, you need to focus on positioning in a way that you can line up multiple targets due to its cleaving capability. When non-empowered, you just need to think about being close enough to land shots with a reduced range. And though you shouldn't plan on missing shots, you do need to consider the possibility that you will. So you need to plan ahead for transitions between aiming for longer range lined up shots with the empowered version, to still being in range for the shorter solo target shots in case you miss your empowered one. Yet beyond this, you must remember to use your shots during your ultimate too, as you can still use both empowered and non-empowered shots during it. The second half of Shiv's primary attack combat comes through the use of her cartwheel. Though she can gain constant resets from cartwheeling and landing the empowered shot it gives her, and therefore have constant empowered shot uptime, she doesn't want to just use it like this. Instead, it's important to consider the threat of the enemy. If the enemy has predictable burst damage or stuns, you should look to spam your non-empowered shots before predicting the burst or stun, and then look to dodge it with your cartwheel. However, if the enemy doesn't have something like this, you're free to just spam your cartwheel as long as you can still hit your follow-up shots. In addition to this, cartwheel gives Shiv a boost of speed, and the empowered shot lingers for a time after the cartwheel. So if you're looking to push on an enemy, you can cartwheel early to get your empowered shot, and then wait a bit before pushing onto them. The speed boost will let you cover the distance to them faster, and the empowered shot will give you a nice advantage at the start of the fight. And if you do end up missing the shot afterwards, you'll still just get your cartwheel back nearly immediately after to have a full fight with minimal penalty. As for Shiv's chain snare, it is useful for both its group and single target uses. Against groups, you'll want to consider how it gets extra range when it hits someone. This way you can target a somewhat distant enemy for the second stun if you can hit one closer before. This means you aren't forced to try and catch two enemies with the base range. Against solos, you can create an engagement trigger for yourself by fishing for and landing the chain snare on a single enemy, as they'll be grounded by it. But if you catch an enemy by surprise, you'll want to delay the chain snare use as long as possible. Instead, you want to predict when they plan to use their dash and catch them with it right before to prevent them from dashing long enough to kill them. Or if you're feeling kinda crazy, you can try and hit them right after they've dashed to stop them, while also forcing their ability to go on its cooldown timer. For Shiv's dagger, it isn't just useful as a toss at enemy and engage tool. Instead, it can be a tool to use to pre-disengage with. If you feel you're likely to be punished after you walk onto a set of enemies, you can toss your dagger behind you and then cartwheel in, before popping the dagger TP to escape to safety when needed. This can get even extra value if comboed with a movement power like Flash to allow for some crazy engagements and then disengagements. In addition to this, Shiv can access double height high ground simply by tossing her dagger on them. The 2.5 dimensional world of Supervive will push the dagger up despite it looking like you'd hit a wall with it, and then you could just TP up right after. Moving on to Shiv's ultimate, it is best used to trash a full group of enemies. So during use, make sure to take advantage of the double cartwheel charges it gives you, while also aiming and using your primary attacks, in addition to chain snare if it's available. But the ultimate is also viable to use against a solo target, as it gives no reduction in total damage output or capability. So if a 1v1 is looking a bit questionable, don't hesitate to pop your ult for the extra damage it dashes. Now with the specifics covered, let's talk about how to apply this all into a full playstyle for Shiv. Shiv's most core playstyle revolves around countering her weaknesses and playing to her advantages. Her advantages of good 1v1 potential and AoE value make her hugely favored in any fight she can safely get close to enemies, whether they're solo or in a group. So she absolutely wants to take the 1v1 fight she can, or herd enemies together by pressuring them so she can then punish them when they've grouped up. Yet of course, Shiv's lack of range means she can't just 5-head into these kind of fights against enemies that outrange her, or they'll burn her down before she can even get close. But also, this doesn't mean she can just throw in her dagger and engage thoughtlessly, as while it's easy to bypass the range problem doing so, this doesn't resolve her second weakness of this engagement style being predictable, and therefore unsafe when she doesn't have some special power to disengage with or to protect herself with after. So what is the solution? The solution is to flank, which is imperative to learn as the randomness of the BR means you often will find something to make Hail Mary dagger engages viable. Instead, learning to flank lets you take advantage of the cover of the map to bypass enemy range. Few enemies are favored against Shiv at close range, so when she uses cover well and can get close to one, they'll be forced to try and ego check her, which shouldn't go well for them, or to just disengage. So essentially, even if enemies can see her the whole time, flanks just let Shiv do exactly what she wants to do. Get herself in range of enemies, or force them to go somewhere else, which will either be to another location Shiv can look to pressure them at, or on top of their own team, where Shiv can crush them with her AoE damage and stuns. So the basic flanking style of Shiv is played sort of like you're hurting the enemy. You can either just walk at them if there's good enough cover to use, or if the cover around you isn't that good, you can just dagger to places where the cover actually is good. Do so without taking unnecessary damage, and any enemy that confronts you will likely slip up at some point, where you can then cartwheel onto them and punish them for it. Even if the enemy doesn't slip up though, you can still force a mistake by fishing at them with your chain snare. Land it and they'll be grounded for an easy kill. However, if any enemies that you meet up just run to their team instead, then they'll just be setting themselves up for death regardless. In the same way, you can just look for another chain snare, which will almost certainly result in a 2 or more person stun if you hit one. Then you can just finish off with the powered cartwheel shots or your ultimate. Shiv should only really struggle if she's caught up by enemies at range. So if you use these tips and make use of this flanking style, you'll dramatically bump your success rate up. Yet this is just how things can go if the enemies even know where you are while flanking, which leads us into the even stronger version of flanking outside of vision. When playing Shiv, you really want to flank in a way that hides yourself from the enemy. Any single target you surprise will almost certainly die to you this way, and you can reliably secure group stuns and 4-person ultimates much more often when the enemy is unaware. While of course it's pretty obvious that catching an enemy by surprise will get you a lot of free kills, Shiv can get a lot of indirect pressure from enemies not knowing her location, whether it be them just playing more conservatively when they only see her 3 allies, or spending a lot of mental resources when they've seen Shiv but then lose track of her. This indirect value is something you can manipulate to your advantage, such as in situations your flank angles are sparse. Just the threat of you being unseen can apply enough pressure that your team can keep things even until the enemy uses enough resources that they can't easily punish you from using a dagger ult engage after. Though while flanking and sneak flanking are the general strategy looking to abuse on Shiv, there's more to her than just that, as Shiv is still somewhat team dependent. Especially as you play at a higher level and enemies become more punishing of engagement mistakes, you really want to consider your teammates' positioning and what characters they're playing when looking for an engage. While of course you could just full engage at the same time if your team is full of high mobility divers, this won't really happen that often. So you really need to be thinking about when your allies can follow up on what you do. If you have something like a dive disruptor on your team like a Felix, you especially need to pay attention, as their value will heavily be dependent on your follow-up. So while you still want to be playing for your own flanks and looking to pressure enemies you run into, taking a 1v4 will not result in much value. And you need to communicate what you're doing. Similarly, you want to think about what sort of resources the enemies have used before you engage. Every character in Supervive has some sort of crowd control ability, so if you haven't seen 1 or 2 go out, you'll be dramatically increasing your chances of being punished on your engage. Or if you're playing into something like a shield character, after you engage you'll need to position yourself such that the shield won't stuff your damage away from the rest of the enemy, or just wait until the shield is chunked down before you even go in. You won't always be able to just wait for your team to perfectly set you up though, which is what the flanking is for, but you do want to be constantly thinking about the state of the fight and then go for the opportunity when a good enough one arises. However, in a very alternate situation, you'll sometimes find yourself playing against an enemy team full or nearly full with characters that want to engage and get close to your team. In those situations, you don't want to aggro on them like you would with other teams, but rather you should save your abilities to counter dive their engagement. So play relatively close to your team and then cartwheel back when the enemy dives, popping your ult and looking for a multi-target chain snare to finish them off. Overall, just make sure to adapt your playstyle to the situation at hand and you'll find much more success on Shiv.